Born on April 24, 1978, Brooke Baker was always a headstrong and independent girl. From a young age, it was clear to her family that she had goals in life and the ambition and drive to reach them. Her main one, to become the best journalist of her generation. In 1997, Brooke was 19 years old and was majoring in journalism at Vincennes University in Indiana. She was also the editor of the student newspaper. Despite her young age, she was already destined for greatness, with her professor stating, "When she was around, you knew she was there." Brooke was ambitious, fearless, and had a great personality. She was not afraid to approach people and loved to learn new things. Perhaps it was this outspoken nature that would sometimes land her in trouble, as she wasn't afraid to tackle the more difficult stories. One particular one, which had hit close to home, was at her own university. In the spring of 1997, an alleged rape had taken place at a fraternity house party, with a female student being the victim of a spiking. After Brooke caught news of this, she conducted several interviews with multiple female students who had prior run-ins with the fraternity members involved. These fraternity members soon became hostile towards Brooke and tried to intimidate her via email, but she did not let this deter her from continuing on with her investigation. Despite how unfazed Brooke was, her mother remained concerned for her safety, but Brooke wanted to publish this story to raise awareness to the other students and deter them from becoming future victims themselves. One particular evening, Brooke had been at a friend's house in an apartment off campus, when a truckload of the fraternity brothers had turned up and threw verbal threats at her. It seemed that tensions were rising to dangerous levels, but Brooke remained relentless. After this encounter, Brooke relocated to a new apartment which was owned by a campus police officer. But this only brought on a new issue for Brooke in regards to her safety, as she would confide in her family and friends that this officer would turn up to her apartment unexpectedly quite often. One time even letting himself in while she was in the shower, and another time shining a light through her window at night. This had left her feeling very uncomfortable and not at all safe. Sadly, on the 7th of September that year, Brooke's brother entered her apartment and was met with a horrifying scene. There, his sister lay dead in her bed. She was naked and had been stabbed 11 times. Police were called and soon arrived to the crime scene. Forensics would later determine that before her death, Brooke had been viciously restrained and had suffered a violent sexual assault. The water in her bathtub had been left running, and knives were found in the water, one of which was bent from the force of the impact during her murder. Police began to look into possible suspects, and there were 3 main theories. The first one considered the fraternity boys who had turned up in person to hurl abuse at Brooke just weeks before her death. Perhaps someone had wanted to silence her to keep her from publishing a story that could ultimately impact their futures and bring about criminal charges. The second theory pointed to the creepy landlord that Brooke had been having issues with. With no signs of forced entry into her apartment, it was believed that he may have let himself in, as he usually did. It was likely that Brooke may have confronted him, and this resulted in a violent struggle which ended in her death. The third theory was that someone posing as a potential roommate may have taken Brooke's life. In the days before her untimely end, Brooke had placed an ad in the college newspaper seeking a new roommate. Investigators believed it was possible that her killer may have come knocking. They also began to examine physical evidence left behind at the scene. DNA on Brooke's lifeless body was compared against 50 suspects, including the landlord and fraternity members, but none proved to be a match. As the weeks passed by with no new suspects, investigators were left scrambling for leads, desperate to keep the case from going dormant. Sadly, despite their best efforts, the case would go cold for the next 2 years. Then, in July of 1999, another Vincennes University student would suffer a similar fate to Brooke Baker when she was reported missing. This was 21-year-old Erica Norman. In a similar fashion to that of Brooke's crime scene, blood was found throughout the apartment. There were no signs of forced entry, and the water was left running in the bathtub. For investigators, this brought about a clear case of déjà vu. Friends claimed that on the night of July the 3rd, she had been at a local bar. Later that evening, she had been sighted by multiple people with a fellow student, 22-year-old Brian Jones. When police looked into Brian, however, he had no past convictions and there was no reason to indicate that he was a potential killer. Nonetheless, he was brought in for questioning and agreed to give a sample of his DNA. Brian also offered up the clothes he had wore on the night he had been seen with Erica, and a search was conducted on his car. After examining the shoes, forensic detectives would locate a single blood stain. Traces of blood would also be found inside his vehicle. Swabs of this blood were sent to the labs for analysis, but it would be a total of 16 days before the results could be confirmed. Meanwhile, over in Lawrence County, Illinois, a farmer would discover a human corpse in his cornfield. The remains were badly decomposed, but dental records would soon confirm that it was Erica Norman. When the lab results finally came back, it was determined that the blood on Brian's shoes and inside his vehicle did belong to Erica. His DNA had also been a positive match to the DNA found on Brooke Baker's body years prior. After being confronted with the results, Brian was charged on July the 13th. When his trial commenced on the 14th of December 2000, he accepted a plea deal for Erica's murder, accepting his guilt in return for the death penalty to be ruled out. Instead, he was sentenced to 60 years in prison. For the rape and murder of Brooke Baker, Brian Jones received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. He remains behind bars to this day.